Have you ever made a mistake so small, so harmless, that it didn't even seem like a mistake, until everything around you suddenly changed forever? Imagine this. You're standing in a crowded airport, exhausted from a long flight, hundreds of suitcases swirling around the carousel like a never-ending storm, and in a split second, you grab the wrong bag. No big deal, right? Just a quick swap at the counter, maybe a little embarrassment, or so you'd think. But what if that one innocent move was the beginning of something much, much bigger? Something you could never walk away from, no matter how much you wished you could? Tonight, you're about to hear the true story of how one wrong suitcase held a secret so powerful, it didn't just flip one man's life upside down. It pulled him into a dangerous world of choices, betrayals, and a decision that would define him forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll finally get the answer you came here for, the shocking truth hidden inside that bag, and why it was never a coincidence that he picked it up in the first place. Now, I want you to really think about this with me for a second. How many moments in your own life seemed random? A missed train, a phone call you almost didn't answer, a wrong turn down a street you don't usually take? What if, just maybe, they weren't random at all? What if the smallest slip-ups are the ones that change the entire direction of your story? I'm not just here to entertain you today. I'm here to open a door, one that you can't close once you step through it. So before we dive headfirst into this unbelievable chain of events, I want to make you a promise. Everything you're about to hear will connect in a way you don't see coming. I'm going to take you to the very heart of the mystery, and I'm not going to leave you hanging without the full picture. You came here because you wanted to know what was inside that suitcase, and I'm telling you now, you're going to get your answer. But not before you walk the same confusing, thrilling, terrifying path that he did. Because trust me, the story isn't just about what he found, it's about what he became. Picture it, a rainy Thursday afternoon, the arrivals terminal at JFK Airport, buzzing with the usual chaos, suitcases bumping into ankles, flight announcements echoing overhead, people rushing past each other like busy ants, every single one of them locked inside their own little world. Somewhere among them is a guy named Daniel Carter, 32 years old, ordinary in every sense you could imagine. Baseball cap pulled low over his tired eyes, a crumpled boarding pass sticking out of his jacket pocket, headphones in but not playing anything. He's just trying to make it through another tedious travel day. Daniel's the kind of guy who blends into a crowd without even trying. You wouldn't give him a second glance. And that's exactly why what happens next could happen to any one of us. Because Daniel wasn't stupid. He wasn't careless. He was just exhausted, distracted, and 2 steps away from his regular life turning into something he never could have prepared for. He stood at baggage claim, watching the suitcases tumble out one by one. Black ones, gray ones, navy blue. Seriously, could luggage be any less original these days? When his suitcase finally showed up, he grabbed it without thinking, double-checked the little red ribbon he always tied to the handle, and rolled it toward the Uber pickup area. Totally normal. Completely forgettable. Except it wasn't his suitcase. Not even close. And by the time Daniel realized something was wrong, he was already sitting in the back seat of the car, halfway across Brooklyn, with a heavy, expensive-feeling bag by his side that practically hummed with the weight of a secret. Now, this is where you and I get real for a second. I know it's tempting to think, come on, I'd notice if I picked up the wrong bag. But when you're tired, when you're distracted, when the universe has other plans for you, the signs don't come screaming. They whisper. You only hear them if you're paying attention. And Daniel? He wasn't paying attention. None of us would have been. And that's exactly how it was meant to happen. The second he unzipped that bag, sitting alone on the edge of his couch with the TV humming in the background, he knew life wasn't going to go back to normal. Because inside it wasn't clothes. It wasn't toiletries. It wasn't anything that belonged in an airport suitcase. It was something that didn't just belong to somebody, it belonged to someone dangerous. Here's the thing I want you to remember as we go deeper into this story. Accidents, mistakes, wrong place, wrong time moments, they are sometimes designed, crafted, like a spider's web you never see until you're already caught in it. Daniel didn't just take the wrong suitcase. He picked up a ticket to a world most people only see in movies. A world filled with coded messages, hidden alliances, and consequences that don't come with second chances. The real question isn't just what he found, it's why that suitcase seemed like it was waiting for him, why he was the one who had to find it, and whether he would survive the truth once it started to unfold. In the next few minutes, you're going to meet the faces behind this mystery, people who aren't who they pretend to be, secrets that are heavier than any suitcase, and a decision Daniel would be forced to make that would either save him or destroy everything he thought he knew about right and wrong. I'm going to ask you to stay with me till the end, because every second of this story matters. Every moment connects. Every piece clicks into place only if you're paying attention. I promise, when you find out what was inside that bag and what it meant, you'll understand why you couldn't miss a single second. But right now, as Daniel stared down at that open suitcase, confusion and dread mixing in his chest, the real nightmare hadn't even started yet. Because even before he could pick up the strange object inside, even before he could ask himself what the hell he was supposed to do next, there was a knock at his door. A heavy, deliberate knock that told him somebody already knew. Somebody who wasn't here to ask nicely. Somebody who wasn't leaving without that bag. And Daniel? He was about to realize he wasn't alone anymore. Daniel froze where he sat, the cold New York air slipping in through a crack in the window and brushing against the back of his neck, sending a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. His eyes darted from the strange suitcase sprawled open on the floor to the front door, where that knock had come again, 3 sharp raps, not loud enough to draw attention from the neighbors, but heavy with the kind of force that said whoever was outside wasn't going to wait much longer. His heart thudded painfully in his chest, his palms starting to sweat as he quickly zipped the suitcase closed and kicked it under the couch. He glanced around the living room, every nerve screaming at him to do something, anything, but all he could do was stand there, paralyzed by a fear he couldn't explain. It didn't make sense. He was nobody, just an average guy with an average life, no enemies, no secrets, no reason to be afraid. Yet somehow, it felt like the walls of his quiet little world were starting to close in. The knock came again, harder this time, followed by a low, almost casual voice calling out, "Daniel Carter? Open up. We just want to talk." The fact that they knew his name made Daniel's stomach twist painfully. No one good ever says, "We just want to talk." Backing away from the door as quietly as he could, Daniel's mind raced. How did they know who he was? Had someone at the airport seen him? Was there a tracker in the bag? Was it even possible that this was just a huge misunderstanding? He thought about calling the police, but a deep, gnawing instinct told him that whoever was outside wasn't the type to wait around for flashing lights. They would get what they came for, one way or another. Daniel ducked into the hallway leading to his bedroom, heart hammering against his ribs, so loud he was sure they could hear it through the door. He needed time to think, to figure this out, and he wasn't going to get it standing here like a deer caught in headlights. He slipped out through the tiny fire escape window in his bathroom, landing hard on the freezing metal stairs and disappearing into the labyrinth of back alleys that crisscrossed behind his building, every step echoing like a gunshot in the silent night. As he moved further into the darkness, Daniel tried to piece together how he had ended up here. 3 days ago, he had been in Chicago for a marketing conference, a last-minute assignment from his boss, nothing unusual. He'd attended the boring panels, collected the free pens and tote bags, even flirted awkwardly with a woman at the hotel bar before chickening out and retreating to his room alone. There had been no shady deals, no mysterious strangers offering him briefcases full of cash or whispered secrets about conspiracies. He had lived his life as carefully as possible since the divorce last year, keeping his head down, focusing on work, trying to rebuild the pieces. That's why this made no sense. Why him? Why now? His thoughts drifted back to the airport carousel, the dozens of look-alike suitcases circling endlessly. He remembered seeing another man, tall, wearing a dark green jacket, pacing anxiously near the luggage belt. Their eyes had met for a brief moment, and Daniel had looked away, thinking nothing of it at the time. But now, replaying it in his mind, there had been something off about the man's stare. Not nervous like a traveler late for a connecting flight, but calculating, watching. Could it be that the suitcase had been planted? That he had been chosen for some reason he didn't understand? The idea seemed crazy, but not nearly as crazy as everything else happening tonight. As Daniel ducked into a 24-hour diner 3 blocks from his apartment to catch his breath, he realized how little he actually knew about what he had found. He had only glanced inside before the knock at the door had interrupted him, but even that fleeting look had been enough to tell him the contents were no accident. There were no clothes, no toiletries, no souvenirs from a trip. What he had seen was a thick, leather-bound notebook with strange symbols etched onto its cover, and a velvet pouch that clinked with something heavy inside, something metallic. And there had been an envelope too, sealed with red wax, no address, no name. Daniel could still feel the weight of it all at his mind, heavy and cold like a stone dropped into deep water. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers nursing coffee at the counter and an old man hunched over a plate of pancakes. Daniel slid into a booth near the back, keeping his head low and his eyes on the rain-smeared window. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for a second, he thought about ignoring it. But when he pulled it out, the screen made his blood run cold. Unknown number. One new message. You have something that belongs to us. Bring it to Pier 17 by midnight. Come alone. No name, no threat, no negotiation. Just a cold demand. Daniel looked up at the greasy clock hanging over the register. It was already 11:07 p.m. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the beginning of a headache pounding at his temples. He needed help, but who could he trust? His mind flicked through the short list of people he was close to. His sister, Maggie, living 2 states away with 2 kids and a mortgage. His coworker, Derek, who could barely keep track of his own coffee order. His old friend Liam, who he hadn't spoken to in months after a stupid fight over money. None of them would understand. None of them could fix this. And worst of all, if he pulled them into it, they might end up just as trapped as he was. The bell over the diner door jingled, and Daniel instinctively shrank deeper into his booth. But it was just a teenage couple laughing about something on a phone. He breathed out shakily. He needed a plan. Needed answers. But even as he tried to think clearly, doubts started creeping in. Was this really just about a suitcase? Or was he caught in something far bigger, something that had nothing to do with him personally, but that he had now become a part of, like a pawn moving across a chessboard without even realizing it? And that man at the baggage claim, the one in the green jacket, had he let Daniel take the suitcase on purpose? Was Daniel even the first person to be pulled into this twisted game? Or just the latest unlucky soul to make the wrong move? And still, the biggest question of all hung heavy over him, gnawing at the edges of his mind, refusing to let him go. Why him? Why now? And what, exactly, was he carrying? As Daniel sat there, staring blankly at the steaming cup of coffee the waitress had placed in front of him, he didn't notice the figure watching him from across the street. A figure who wasn't wearing a green jacket this time, but something far more ordinary. Something you wouldn't look twice at in a crowd. Something that would make them invisible until it was far too late. Because in this game, it wasn't just Daniel making moves. He was already being hunted, and the clock was ticking down faster than he realized. And the truth was, midnight wasn't a deadline. It was a trap. And Daniel was already walking straight into it. Daniel pulled the hood of his jacket up against the rain as he stepped out of the diner, the cold night pressing down on him like a living thing. His mind was still spinning from the message, Pier 17 by midnight, come alone, and every instinct inside him screamed that he was walking straight into something he couldn't handle. Yet he knew he didn't have a choice. If he didn't show, whoever had sent that text would come looking, and next time, they might not knock so politely. The streets were nearly empty, just a few late-night wanderers hunched against the weather, and Daniel kept his head down as he moved, every shadow suddenly feeling too deep, every set of footsteps behind him making his skin crawl. He kept thinking about that suitcase, about the weight of it under his couch, about the notebook and the heavy velvet pouch and that strange, old-fashioned envelope with its blood-red wax seal. None of it made sense. None of it belonged to the real world he knew, and yet somehow it had landed in his lap like a ticking bomb. He reached into his pocket to check his phone again, half expecting another message to pop up, but the screen stayed dark. Still, the feeling that he was being watched never left him. Meanwhile, across the city, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment filled with the soft blue glow of a TV left running on mute. Maggie Carter, Daniel's younger sister, sat cross-legged on her couch, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. She should have been asleep hours ago, but something had been gnawing at her all night, a weird tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. She told herself it was just stress. 2 kids, a mountain of bills, a new boss who seemed to think deadlines were a form of personal punishment, but when her phone buzzed sharply in her hand, she nearly dropped it in surprise. She looked down and frowned. No caller ID. No contact name. Just a single text. Ask your brother about the suitcase. Before it's too late. Her stomach dropped, the words swimming in front of her eyes. She hadn't even known Daniel had been traveling. They didn't talk much lately, not because they didn't care, but because life had a way of getting in the way. She thought about calling him immediately, but something about the message, the starkness of it, the coldness, made her hesitate. She reread it a second time, then a third, the feeling of dread in her chest growing heavier with each second. Daniel didn't know it yet, but he wasn't the only target tonight. Whoever had sent that message was widening the circle, pulling in the people he loved, turning up the pressure in ways he hadn't even imagined. It wasn't just about a stolen suitcase anymore. It wasn't just about an accidental mix-up at an airport. Someone had a plan, and that plan wasn't just about getting the suitcase back. It was about dragging Daniel's entire life into chaos, one slow, painful thread at a time. And Maggie? She was just the first crack in the armor. As she sat there, heart pounding, trying to figure out what to do, a knock sounded at her door, soft, almost hesitant. For a second she thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone needing help. But when she looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Only a plain, brown envelope lying on her doormat, already soaking through with rain. She bent down, hands trembling slightly, and picked it up. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, but clear enough. It was Daniel, walking alone through the airport, dragging a suitcase behind him. And scrawled across the bottom in thick black ink were just 2 words: "Time's up." Back on the wet, glistening streets of Manhattan, Daniel finally made it to Pier 17, the lights of the city blurring into streaks behind the rain. The pier was nearly deserted, the shops and restaurants closed for the night, the river beyond it a dark, endless stretch of water. He pulled his jacket tighter around himself and scanned the shadows, but there was no one there, no obvious trap waiting to spring. Just the echo of his own footsteps against the wooden planks and the creak of the river lapping against the posts. He walked toward the end of the pier, heart hammering in his chest, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to run, to hide, but it was too late for that now. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. As he neared the edge of the pier, he spotted a figure standing just beyond the reach of the streetlights, almost swallowed by the darkness. It was a woman, tall and thin, wearing a long black coat and a scarf wrapped tightly around her face. In one hand, she held a cell phone, the screen casting an eerie blue glow onto her gloved fingers. She didn't move as Daniel approached, didn't say a word. He stopped a few feet away, unsure whether to speak first. Before he could open his mouth, the woman lifted the phone and tapped the screen once. Instantly, Daniel's own phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, hands numb, and saw a new text waiting for him. "You're not the only one who made a mistake tonight." His blood turned to ice. What did that mean? Was there another suitcase? Another victim? Another game being played that he didn't even know about yet? He opened his mouth to ask a question, but in that instant, the woman dropped the phone into the river, turned on her heel, and disappeared into the night, her footsteps vanishing into the wet darkness before Daniel could even react. He stood there, heart racing, mind spinning, the cold biting through his clothes and into his bones.
Nothing about this made sense.
He had expected threats, demands, maybe even violence. But cryptic clues? Phantom warnings? It felt less like a mugging and more like he was being pushed along a path someone else had already laid out for him. Someone who knew his moves before he made them. Someone who wasn't working alone. Far away, in the quiet safety of her apartment, Maggie clutched the photograph tighter in her hands, her mind racing through every memory she had of her brother, trying to fit this terrifying new piece into the puzzle. She didn't know yet that her kid's school had already received an anonymous call warning of a family emergency that would require them to leave early tomorrow. She didn't know that Daniel's apartment was even now being watched by a second team, different from the first, with a different agenda entirely. And she didn't know that when Daniel picked up that suitcase, he hadn't just picked up someone else's belongings. He had picked up a key to something so much bigger, something that had been waiting for someone reckless enough, desperate enough, unlucky enough to stumble into it. As Daniel stood alone on that pier, the city sprawling out behind him like a living, breathing monster, he realized something he hadn't dared admit to himself before. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about control, about power, about secrets buried so deep that dragging them into the light would tear apart more than just a few lives. It could unravel everything. And somewhere, someone was counting on him to make exactly the wrong choice. Someone was counting on fear to drive him into their hands. And the worst part was, it was working. Daniel stayed on the pier long after the woman disappeared, the cold gnawing at him like a living thing, but he couldn't move, because deep inside, he knew something was about to break wide open, something that would change everything he thought he understood about the nightmare he had fallen into. He stared out over the black water, trying to piece together the broken fragments of the night. The wrong suitcase, the strange symbols, the envelope, the warnings, Maggie's involvement, when he finally forced himself to leave. His steps were heavy, his mind drowning in unanswered questions, but he knew one thing now for sure. He couldn't keep running. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He would go back to his apartment, get the suitcase, and this time he would really dig through it. No more glancing. No more hesitation. If he didn't figure it out tonight, he might not get another chance. When Daniel reached his building, everything looked the same. The dim lobby lights, the cracked tile floor, the humming vending machine, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood up the moment he stepped inside. The front desk guy, an old-timer named Lou, usually half asleep with a game show playing on the tiny TV behind him, was nowhere to be seen. The chair sat empty, spinning slightly as if Lou had just gotten up. And there, taped crookedly to the front of the desk, was another plain brown envelope. Daniel's throat tightened. He snatched it off the desk and tore it open right there. Inside was a single strip of paper, and on it were 6 words, scrawled in that same jagged black ink. "Look closer. You missed the truth." His hands trembled as he stuffed the paper in his pocket and sprinted to the elevator, jabbing the button over and over like it might make the car move faster. Bursting into his apartment, Daniel immediately dropped to the floor and dragged the suitcase out from under the couch. His heart hammered in his ears as he unzipped it, throwing the top open. The notebook was still there, the velvet pouch too, and the sealed envelope, untouched. He yanked the notebook out first, flipping it open to the first page, and stopped cold. He had been so sure before that the symbols on the cover were random, meaningless. But now, looking closely under the harsh overhead light, he saw it, a watermark buried in the fibers of the page. A familiar shape. It wasn't just random symbols. It was a logo, one he knew very well. His own company's logo. A chill raced down his spine as he flipped through the notebook, page after page filled with blueprints, confidential documents, research projects, things he had only ever heard rumors about in hushed tones around the office. Things that weren't supposed to exist outside top-tier security clearance. And worse, sprinkled among the pages were names and addresses of employees, co-workers, people Daniel recognized, all attached to strange annotations, dates, times, coded remarks. This wasn't just a notebook. It was a map. A detailed roadmap of surveillance, blackmail, covert operations. His fingers fumbled as he opened the velvet pouch next, and out spilled several small silver discs, hard drives. Portable ones. Easily hidden. Easily sold. Daniel staggered back, the full weight of what he was holding crashing down on him. He hadn't stumbled into some random criminal scheme. He had stolen from his own employer. By accident, yes, but the kind of accident that didn't get forgiven. The kind that made people disappear. And whoever was after him wasn't some faceless cartel or foreign agent. It was his own people, his own company. And they weren't trying to recover a mistake. They were trying to erase it. His phone buzzed again, vibrating violently against the floor where he had dropped it. When he picked it up, he expected another anonymous threat, another cryptic demand. But it wasn't. It was Maggie, her voice shaky and small over the crackling line. "Danny, someone's outside my building," she whispered. "I think they're watching me. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know if I should call the police." "No," Daniel said automatically, his mind racing. "Don't call anyone. Just stay inside. Don't answer the door. I'll be there as soon as I can." But even as he said the words, a sickening realization washed over him. They had already gotten to Maggie. They had already drawn her into this. And worse, he might have already been too late to save her. Throwing the drives and the notebook into a backpack, Daniel headed for the door. But just as he reached for the handle, his phone buzzed again. This time, a new message from an unknown number. It simply read, "Don't trust her." For a moment, he froze, his hand inches from the doorknob. Was it about Maggie?
No, that couldn't be.
His sister was innocent, caught in this because of him. But the longer he stood there, the deeper that doubt wormed its way into his mind. What if it wasn't Maggie the message was about? What if it wasn't her at all? What if the woman on the pier, the fake watchers, the eerie threats, what if it was all part of something much bigger? What if there was someone else playing a different game entirely? And then, as he replayed Maggie's call in his mind, something stuck out. A detail he had missed in the panic. Maggie had said she received a warning. "Ask your brother about the suitcase." But she hadn't asked. She hadn't even mentioned it until now. She had waited until he was isolated, desperate, ready to run. And now, conveniently, she needed him to come to her. For the first time that night, a new, far more terrifying thought entered Daniel's mind. What if Maggie wasn't the victim? What if she was the bait? And Daniel, running straight toward her, was about to walk into the biggest trap of all. Daniel stood frozen at his apartment door, the weight of that last message pressing down on him harder than anything he had felt all night. His hand hovered over the doorknob, the cool metal sending a jolt of fear through his body. Every instinct pulled him to move, to act, to save Maggie. But now there was a new voice whispering in the back of his mind, cold and ruthless. What if saving her meant walking straight into a trap he couldn't escape? He closed his eyes for a second, forcing himself to breathe, to think. If he hesitated too long, something could happen to Maggie. If he rushed in blind, it could be the last move he ever made. There was no right answer. No safe choice. Only different kinds of loss. Heart hammering against his ribs, he made the decision that tore him apart inside. He would go to her, but he wouldn't go unprepared. He shoved the velvet pouch of drives into his backpack, threw on a dark hoodie, and tucked a small pocket knife into his belt, a pathetic weapon but better than nothing. Then he slipped out into the night, feeling like he was stepping off the edge of a cliff he couldn't see the bottom of. The streets felt different now, like they were pressing in around him, every passing stranger a potential enemy, every shadow a threat. He kept his head low as he moved, avoiding the pools of light from the street lamps, sticking close to the walls. When he finally reached Maggie's building, a crumbling brick complex tucked between two empty lots, he hesitated across the street, hidden in the shadows, just watching. Her window on the second floor was lit, and for a moment, he thought he saw a figure move behind the curtain. His heart clenched. Was she alone? Or had someone already gotten to her? Was she even in danger at all? Or was she part of the danger? He felt sick just thinking it, but he couldn't afford to ignore the possibility anymore. Not when his life, and hers, was hanging in the balance. Forcing himself to move, Daniel crossed the street and slipped into the building. The lock on the front door was broken, swinging open with a low, groaning creak that seemed to echo through the empty hallway. He climbed the stairs two at a time, his muscles tight with adrenaline, until he reached Maggie's door. He knocked once, sharp and quick. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time, his hand itching toward the knife hidden under his hoodie. Finally, the door cracked open just a sliver, and Maggie's wide, fearful eyes stared out at him. She yanked the door open the rest of the way and grabbed his arm, pulling him inside. "You came," she whispered, her voice shaking. She looked exhausted, her hair tangled, dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, seeing her like that, the part of Daniel that still clung to the past, the part that remembered carrying her on his shoulders at the 4th of July fair or sneaking her extra candy on Halloween, wanted to believe that she couldn't be part of this, that she couldn't have betrayed him. But then he remembered the message, "Don't trust her," and the photo, and the strange timing of her call. "You okay?" he asked carefully, scanning the small living room for signs of anyone else. The place looked undisturbed, blankets tossed over the couch, kids' toys scattered across the floor. But that didn't mean it was safe. Maggie nodded quickly, too quickly. "I think they're gone. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know who to trust." She squeezed his arm harder. "Danny, what's going on? What's in the suitcase?" He pulled away slightly, narrowing his eyes. She hadn't asked about the suitcase before. Not when she first called. Not even when she texted him earlier. But now, standing here face to face, it was the first thing out of her mouth. Every alarm inside him blared louder. He needed to be sure. He needed to know if the person he loved most in the world was about to stab him in the back. "You tell me," he said quietly, watching her face closely. "You said someone texted you. What exactly did they say?" Maggie hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, her voice barely above a whisper. They said you had something dangerous. Something you weren't supposed to have. That people would come after you for it. That if I didn't help, they'd come after me and the kids." Daniel's stomach twisted into knots. She sounded so genuine, so terrified. And maybe she was. Maybe she had been dragged into this just like he had. But then again, maybe that was exactly what she wanted him to think. He could feel the choice rising up inside him, sharp and brutal. Trust her or don't. Save her or save himself. There was no third option. Before he could speak, Maggie stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "Please, Danny.
Give it to them.
Whatever it is. Just give it to them and walk away. You don't owe anyone anything. Not your company, not these people. Please. Just let it go." The words hit him harder than a punch to the gut. She didn't even know what it was, but she wanted him to hand it over. No questions asked. No fight. No hesitation. And that told Daniel everything he needed to know. She was working with them. Maybe not willingly. Maybe not because she wanted to hurt him. Maybe because someone had made her believe it was the only way to protect her children. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter. The fact was, Maggie had become another pawn in the game. And now Daniel had to make an impossible decision. Hand over the drives and the notebook and pray they let him and Maggie live. Or hold on to the truth, knowing it might cost him everything he loved. His throat burned as he turned away from her, the backpack heavy on his shoulders. Maggie called after him, her voice cracking with fear and something that almost sounded like betrayal. But Daniel couldn't look back. Not now. Not when he knew that every step he took toward the truth pushed him further away from the life he thought he knew. Because deep down, he finally understood. This wasn't about saving himself anymore. This was about exposing something so dark, so powerful, that the people behind it would do anything to stop him. Even if it meant destroying everyone he loved. And Daniel knew. He was already running out of time. Daniel didn't remember leaving Maggie's building, didn't remember the cold rain soaking through his hoodie, didn't even remember crossing the empty streets, only that somehow he found himself moving faster than he ever had before, driven by something raw and ugly clawing at the inside of his chest. His mind was a white-hot blur of betrayal and fear, every thought fighting to be heard at once. Maggie, the one person he trusted without question, had almost sold him out without even knowing what was at stake. Not because she hated him, not because she wanted to hurt him, but because someone had wrapped their hands around her fear and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. It was bigger than him now. Bigger than Maggie. And he realized, as he ducked into an abandoned subway entrance to catch his breath, that he had been thinking about it all wrong from the beginning. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a freak accident. This was a setup. His phone buzzed again, and for a second, he almost smashed it against the concrete wall, but something told him to look. Another unknown number. Another message. This time it wasn't a threat, wasn't a demand. Just an address. No explanation. No instructions. Just a set of coordinates leading to an industrial part of the city Daniel didn't know and didn't want to know. But his gut told him that whatever waited for him there, it was the heart of the storm. The center of everything that had spun his life into chaos. He couldn't run anymore. He had to finish it. Daniel didn't call for an Uber, didn't hop a train. He moved through the city like a ghost, invisible, paranoid, feeling like eyes were on him from every rooftop and alley. He knew it was stupid, reckless, but part of him also knew the clock was running out. If he hesitated now, if he made one wrong move, he wouldn't live long enough to regret it. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached the address, a crumbling warehouse on the edge of the river, surrounded by chain-link fence and abandoned machinery. The place smelled of rust and wet concrete, and the broken windows stared down at him like hollow eyes. He slipped through a gap in the fence and crept toward the side door, every step a prayer that he wasn't too late, that he wasn't walking into a bullet. Inside, the air was heavy and stale. Dim overhead lights flickered erratically, casting long, warped shadows across the cracked floor. In the center of the room, a group of people stood in a loose circle, their faces half hidden by the gloom. And standing among them, like it was the most normal thing in the world, was Derek, Daniel's coworker, the same Derek who could barely keep track of his own emails, the same Derek who had once bailed Daniel out of a disastrous project with nothing but a joke and a shrug. Daniel's stomach dropped. Derek caught his eye immediately, giving him a slow, almost pitying shake of the head. "Took you long enough," he said quietly, voice barely carrying across the space. Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. "What the hell is this, Derek?" His voice cracked with disbelief, anger, and something even uglier underneath. Hurt. Derek stepped forward, hands raised like he was trying to calm a wild animal. "It's not what you think, man. You think you're the first? You think you're special? They've been watching all of us. Everyone in that office. Testing us. Seeing who's loyal.
Who's weak.
You just happened to be the one who picked up the wrong bag." He gave a sad little shrug. Or maybe the right bag. The people around him shifted, and Daniel realized with growing horror that he recognized some of them. Faces from the office. Security guards. Even a woman from accounting who had always brought cupcakes to birthday parties. They weren't strangers. They weren't outsiders. They were part of it. They were the conspiracy. "You were never supposed to see what was inside," Derek said, voice hardening now. "It was a test. And you failed." Daniel's breath came in short, shallow gasps. "Failed what?" "The company's not just a company, Danny. It's a front. A shell. The real business happens in the shadows. Information, leverage, power. They own politicians, judges, CEOs. They make decisions that move billions without anyone even knowing. And they need people who can be trusted to carry the weight of those secrets." Derek's eyes gleamed under the flickering lights. You had a choice. Hand it back and pretend you never saw it. Or dig deeper. You dug. You poked around. You didn't know when to stop. Daniel's mind reeled. It felt like the floor was tilting under him. Every boring conference, every tedious email chain, every seemingly meaningless security check, they were all part of something bigger. And he had been blind to it all. "You can still fix this," Derek said, stepping closer. "Hand over the drives. Hand over the notebook. Take the deal. Clean slate. Or..." His voice dropped. "We make this problem disappear another way." Daniel shook his head, his heart breaking wide open. "And Maggie," he demanded. "Was she part of it too?" Derek's expression twisted into something almost sympathetic. "She didn't have a choice either. They put the screws to her. Threatened her kids. She thought she was saving you." The betrayal hit harder than any punch. But more than that, the realization that Maggie was just another casualty in a game he hadn't even known he was playing. A game where the rules were written by people who didn't care, who got crushed underneath them. Daniel looked down at the backpack slung over his shoulder, feeling the weight of it like a loaded gun pressed against his ribs. He could give it up. Walk away. Pretend none of this ever happened. Protect Maggie. Protect himself. Go back to his meaningless, hollow life. Or he could burn it all down. He tightened his grip on the strap. And in that moment, Daniel knew he wasn't walking out of here the same man who walked in. He was either going to expose the truth or die trying. The warehouse felt like it was closing in around Daniel, the air thick with sweat and fear and the faint metallic tang of blood long dried into the concrete. Every step he took echoed, a hollow, accusing sound that bounced off the cracked walls. Derek watched him closely, his hands still raised, trying to keep the situation calm, but Daniel could see the others slowly fanning out, circling him like wolves sizing up their prey. He could feel the weight of the notebook and drives in his backpack, the way they seemed to hum with invisible energy, as if they knew the choice he was about to make. His pulse roared in his ears, and for one brief, blinding second, he thought about throwing it all at Derek's feet, begging for forgiveness, taking the easy way out. But then he remembered Maggie's voice, trembling with fear, remembered the lies they forced her to tell, the way they turned her love into a weapon against him. They would never stop. Not if he gave them what they wanted. Not if he begged. They would just find another way to silence him, to erase him like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. Daniel let his backpack slip slowly from his shoulders, but instead of tossing it forward, he dropped it at his own feet, planting himself like a wall between them and the truth. Derek's eyes flickered to the bag, to Daniel's clenched fists, and for the first time, Daniel saw it doubt.
Good.
Let them doubt. Let them wonder if he had come here to die or to fight. Without a word, Daniel reached into the front pocket of the bag and pulled out the tiny, ancient voice recorder he had found tucked into the lining of the suitcase. A piece of outdated tech nobody would think to check, nobody would realize had been recording everything: Derek's confession, the threats, the truth about the company. The little red light on the side blinked steadily, a heartbeat counting down to the end of the game. Derek's face twisted into something ugly and furious the second he saw it, and suddenly the calm, friendly act dropped away like a mask melting in fire. "You stupid little," he snarled, lunging forward, but Daniel was ready. He snatched the recorder and hurled it as hard as he could toward the windows high above, aiming for the open duct that vented outside. A small thud, then silence, and Daniel prayed it had landed where he hoped, outside the building, where a second device, a cheap little wireless transmitter he had bought on impulse last year for a prank, was now broadcasting every word to a secure cloud server he had set up with shaking hands an hour ago. The trap was set. Even if they killed him, the truth was already moving, already spreading. Chaos erupted instantly. Derek shouted something to the others and they surged forward, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the backpack and ran, adrenaline giving him speed he didn't know he had. A hand caught the strap of his hoodie and yanked hard, but Daniel spun, slamming his elbow into the attacker's face with a sickening crunch. He didn't look back. He barreled through the side door, into the rain-slick night, boots slipping on the cracked asphalt, lungs burning. He didn't make it far. A black SUV screeched around the corner, blocking his path. Two figures spilled out, guns drawn, faces hidden behind masks. Daniel skidded to a stop, heart hammering so loudly he thought it might break apart in his chest. No way out. No help coming. Only one move left to make. He raised his hands slowly, showing them he was unarmed. One of the masked figures barked an order, demanding he drop the bag. Daniel hesitated just a second too long, and then something incredible happened. Screams shattered the night air. Flashing red and blue lights lit up the broken windows of the warehouse. Sirens howled like wolves in the dark. The figures froze, their heads whipping toward the noise just as unmarked police cars roared into view, tires screeching against the wet pavement. Federal agents swarmed the area, shouting commands, weapons trained on the stunned conspirators. Derek burst from the building, shouting protests, but was tackled hard to the ground. Someone had called them. Someone had tipped off the authorities. Daniel stood frozen, still clutching the backpack like a lifeline, as two agents approached him cautiously, their expressions hard but not hostile. One of them, a tall woman with sharp gray eyes, stepped forward and spoke into a radio clipped to her vest. "We've got the package. And the source is alive." She turned her gaze to Daniel. "You're lucky, kid. If that transmission hadn't gone out when it did, we might not have gotten here in time." Daniel swallowed hard, feeling the weight of everything hit him all at once. His knees buckled and he dropped to the ground, the rain soaking into his jeans, mixing with the tears he couldn't hold back anymore. Relief, rage, exhaustion, they all poured out of him in one broken gasp. But just when he thought it was over, when he thought he could finally breathe, the gray-eyed agent knelt down beside him and lowered her voice, so only he could hear. "You did good," she said. "But you only uncovered one piece of the puzzle. There's more. Much more. And now they know who you are." Daniel looked up at her, his chest tightening all over again. "They'll come for you," she said simply. "And next time, you'll have to decide which side you're really on." She gave him a tight, knowing smile, then rose and disappeared into the chaos, leaving Daniel kneeling in the rain, staring after her, feeling the whole world shift beneath his feet once again. Because he hadn't won. He had only just begun to understand the war he had stumbled into. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows beyond the flashing lights and the screaming sirens, new enemies were already watching him, waiting for him to slip, waiting for their turn. The days that followed felt like walking through a dream that never quite became reality, the kind where everything looked the same, but felt unbearably different underneath. Daniel sat by the window of a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the neon sign buzzing and flickering like it was on its last breath. He stared out at the darkened road stretching endlessly into the night, replaying everything that had happened, every word, every betrayal, every impossible choice. The notebook and the drives were gone now, turned over to the agents who promised to handle it, but Daniel knew better than to believe it was truly over. You don't take on giants and expect them to fall in a day. Sometimes all you can do is survive, breathe, and keep moving, knowing that the shadows you stirred might follow you for the rest of your life. Maggie had called once, her voice barely above a whisper, telling him she was safe, that her kids were safe, that they were going somewhere far away where no one could ever use them again. She didn't apologize. She didn't have to. They both understood now what fear could make people do, and forgiveness wasn't something Daniel needed to offer. It was something they both had silently agreed to give each other. Family wasn't just blood. Sometimes it was the people who chose you when they didn't have to, and despite everything, Daniel knew Maggie had chosen him when it counted. That would have to be enough. The news didn't cover the warehouse raid, didn't mention the names of the people who had been arrested or the dark web of corruption they had uncovered. Instead, the headlines were filled with distractions, celebrity scandals, political finger-pointing, viral TikTok trends. The real story, the one that mattered, was buried deep where most people would never bother to look. That was how it worked. Keep the world spinning on the surface, while the real players moved the pieces underneath. Daniel could feel the weight of that knowledge settling inside him like a stone. He wasn't naive anymore. He knew now that the enemy wasn't always a person you could confront face to face. Sometimes the enemy was a system, a whisper, a decision made behind closed doors. He rubbed his thumb over the edge of the burner phone the agents had given him, a direct line in case he saw something, in case he had second thoughts about disappearing. It sat on the table next to a manila envelope thick with cash, a new ID, and instructions on how to start over. Daniel could take it. He could vanish. Build a new life in some dusty corner of the country where nobody knew his name, where he could wake up every morning without wondering if today would be the day someone came for him. It was tempting. It was easy. It was safe. But safe had a price. It meant silence. It meant letting the people who built the cages keep building them, stacking them higher, making sure nobody ever even realized they were trapped. Daniel wasn't sure he could live like that anymore, pretending not to see the bars just because they weren't made of iron. He knew things now. Dangerous things. And once you saw the truth, it was a weight you carried forever. He leaned back in the stiff motel chair, the cheap upholstery scratching against his skin, and let out a slow, bitter laugh. Maybe they had chosen him without realizing it. Maybe when he grabbed that wrong suitcase, the universe, fate, whatever you wanted to call it, had decided it was time for somebody ordinary to step into a fight too big for him. Maybe there were no accidents. No coincidences. In the dim light, Daniel pulled out a battered spiral notebook he had picked up from a gas station on the drive out of town. He opened it to the first page and began to write, not everything, not yet, but enough. Names, dates, places. Things people needed to know if they ever decided to open their eyes. He wasn't stupid enough to think he could change the world overnight. But maybe he could start something. Maybe he could leave a trail for the next person who stumbled into the darkness, make sure they weren't alone when they realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. Outside, a car rolled slowly past the motel, headlights flashing across the window, lingering just a second too long before moving on. Daniel stiffened, every nerve on edge, but the car disappeared down the road without stopping. False alarm. Maybe. Or maybe not. It didn't matter. He wasn't going to run. Not anymore. He finished the page and tore it out, folding it carefully and sliding it into his jacket pocket. When he stood, he left the burner phone and the envelope behind, a silent refusal, a quiet declaration of war. He didn't need their protection. He needed the truth. And he was willing to pay the price. As Daniel stepped into the cold night air, the stars invisible behind the haze of city lights, he felt something strange and powerful inside him, a calm he hadn't known he was capable of. Not peace, exactly, but something close to it. Purpose. He knew there would be more danger ahead, more betrayals, more nights spent wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. But he also knew one unshakable thing. They had tried to break him, and he was still standing. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, lonely and thin against the night. Daniel turned his collar up against the wind and started walking, his shadows stretching out before him on the cracked asphalt, long and defiant. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. And this time, Daniel was ready.